Hi, and welcome to Chapter 26. In Chapter 26, we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to take a look at the difference between savings and investment. And then we're going to talk about the national income accounts and financial systems in general. So it's a kind of a nice overview of lots of things that we're going to touch back on. So this particular chapter is pretty important, and I will highlight those things as well as provide additional back to them as I do when we further the discussion. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen with you and we'll get to it. In our first objective, what we want to take a look at is define and discuss financial institutions in the U.S. economy. We want to look at what is the relationship between bond prices and then the interest rate, and then explain the difference between the bond market and the stock market. Okay, so without further ado, let me go ahead and show you our first video.
The financial system is referred to quite a bit in the news. It is the group of institutions in an economy that help to match people and firms that have excess financial capital with people and firms looking to borrow or raise financial capital. We all participate in this financial system one way or another. If we have savings in a bank, our money is active in the financial system. If we borrow money to buy a house, car, or through credit cards, we're making use of the system.
There are two basic types of institutions in the financial system. We've got financial intermediaries and financial markets. Financial intermediaries are institutions where funds are transferred indirectly between parties. So for example, a bank is a financial intermediary. You make deposits at your bank. Other individuals come ask for loans at the bank, and the bank does the ground in the middle. So they match you with your excess funds with someone who wishes to borrow funds, and the bank does the transaction.
We talked a lot about banking institutions in the savings unit, so we'll move on to the other common type of financial intermediary, a mutual fund. This is an institution that buys an assortment of stocks and bonds, called a portfolio, and then sells shares of the portfolio to the public. Because you are not directly choosing the stocks and bonds and not directly buying them, a mutual fund is a financial intermediary going between you and the stocks and bonds.
Here's why many people invest in mutual funds. Let's suppose you have $500 you'd like to invest and you purchase one company's stock. Now, if that company does well, the stock goes up in value, you've made a good investment. But if that company does poorly, you lose money. It's kind of like putting all of your eggs in one basket when you buy only one company's stock. So here's where a mutual fund comes in. They allow you to diversify your investment because you're buying a share of a portfolio that's invested in many stocks. So some of the stocks will be going up and some of the stocks might be going down, but on balance, you should be able to come out okay.
Another reason people like mutual funds is because they don't have to follow individual stocks to track their investment.
If you don't want to take the time to learn about individual stocks, you can buy a mutual fund that will buy those stocks for you. I think very convenient. You add safety to it because you're diversified in many different stocks. You've got a manager that's hired to buy those stocks for you, to pick and choose, so you don't have to know much about it.
Professional investors manage mutual funds and are the ones tracking stocks and bonds and deciding when to buy or sell. All you have to do is select the mutual fund you want to buy and how much you want to invest.
Unlike your savings account, a mutual fund is not FDIC insured. That means you're not guaranteed to get your money back. But because there is a higher risk, you'll actually earn a higher return, or at least you could. Now, this is something important to keep in mind. If you're earning a higher return, it's because you're being compensated for taking on more risk. If you ever hear of an investment that has a great rate of return and has no risk, it is not a sure thing.
Financial markets are institutions where funds are transferred directly between parties. The two most common types of financial markets are the stock market and bond market. If you want to buy a stock, you can just go online and buy one. Same thing with bonds. You are making your transaction directly with the stockholder or bondholder. Sure, a third party might actually facilitate the transaction or transfer of funds. When we say the funds are transferred directly, we mean you are choosing the stock and when to buy it. Someone isn't doing that part for you.
Okay, now that you have a better idea of the difference between a financial market and a financial intermediary, what we're going to do is just kind of talk broadly about what you just watched. So financial markets and financial intermediaries. Again, the financial system. Now, this is what I want you to remember because it's important for the test and these kind of things. So what is the purpose? And it is to match. Okay, match one person's saving with another person's investment. Okay, so again, moving those scarce resources from people that save them to people that borrow them. And there are two types of financial institutions that we talk about, the markets and the intermediaries. And that was introduced in your first video there. Again, financial markets, savers can directly provide funds to borrowers. And we have the bond market and the stock market. So let's talk about those for just a moment. What's the difference between a stock and a bond? Well, a stock is what we call equity financing. It's where you're selling off an ownership in the company, but it doesn't have to be repaid, okay? Bonds are certificates of indebtedness. So this is what we call debt financing. Okay, and again, when the loan will be repaid, okay? It has a rate of interest and then the principal, which is the amount borrowed, okay? So again, who issues bonds? Again, large corporations are one, the federal government, state and local governments. And many times local governments will issue what we call municipal bonds. And the reason that people like those is because they are tax deductible, okay? So the interest that you're paying, tax deductible, okay? All right. Now, there's a couple of things that bonds are a little bit different. They're usually longer in length. So many times people will buy a stock and sell it very quickly. That doesn't necessarily happen. Longer term bonds are more risky than shorter term. So if we have a 30-day bond and we have a 30-year bond, the 30-year is going to pay a higher interest rate. Now, why? Because there's more exposure for the person that is buying the bond. A lot can happen in 30 years, right? That's a lot more risky than 30 days. So we're going to see lower interest rates the shorter the time horizon. And this is, we're going to talk about that in an upcoming slide about the risk-return trade-off. Okay, now the probability of default. So bonds are rated, and they're rated by two rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's. And bonds receive ratings. They can go all the way from AAA, which is not very risky, and so it pays a very low interest rate, to I believe it is BB, which are junk bonds that pay a very high interest rate. Okay, so the higher interest rates, the higher the probability of you not getting your money back. Again, government bonds tend to pay lower interest rate. So let me ask you, does anyone know what the bond rating is right now for the United States? It was AAA, but it has been downgraded to AA. And so what we know about that is that the bonds that the United States issued are issued at a higher interest rate than previously when we were at AAA. Okay, tax treatment. Again, interest on most bonds is what we call taxable income or capital gains. And depending on income tax brackets and so on, that can be as much as 30%. So that means anything you make. So let's say that you buy a $1,000 bond, it pays a 10% interest rate, and let's just do 1 year, okay? Principal times rate times time. So we're going to make $100 on that bond. The $100 that we make on the bond is going to be subject to capital gains. And so they're going to tax that at 30%. So $30 of taxes. So your actual gain is only $70. Okay. Again, municipal bonds, one of their attractiveness is that you do not have to pay federal income tax. And sometimes they carry that lower interest rate, and the reason is because of the tax break that you get on municipal bonds. Municipal bonds, state and local government. The stock market is equity financing, okay? And when we look at this, we have many organized exchanges here in the US. We have the New York Stock Exchange, the American Stock Exchange, we have the NASDAQ, and so on, okay? Again, sale of ownership to raise money. Now, there are what we call stock indexes, and stock indexes are, for example, let's say that you wanted to buy every stock in the New York Stock Exchange. Can't do that, right? Because it's just way too expensive for the average person to be able to do that. So what you might buy is an index fund. And index funds basically take all the stock in the New York Stock Exchange, and they would divide it into small slivers, like maybe a 16th of a share, lots of small slivers. But you would have the same portfolio that the New York Stock Exchange is. These are actually called diamonds when it's the New York Stock Exchange. And so again, an average group of stock prices. So it's a group that is mirrored, but you don't own as much as what that foundational organized exchange has. Mutual funds are another way to accomplish something very similar. And we're going to talk about that in some upcoming chapters, I think, as well. Okay, that's the end of this particular objective, and I'll see you back in objective 2. Thanks.